Hello folks, I'm Alex, this is Alex Unabridged, and this is my Trans Day of Visibility special. So welcome back to the channel if that is the case. Yes, it's International Transgender Day of Visibility today, 31st of March, or Trans Day of Visibility, if you want something a bit easier to say. What is it? It is a day for celebrating trans and non-binary folk and for recognising and raising awareness of some of the discrimination that we face all over the world. I'm going to focus primarily on the celebration side of things, celebrating some trans and non-binary writers and a few others, BookTubers, for instance, YouTubers. But I do just want to say a quick word about some of the problems that we are having. It is quite a scary time to be trans right now, much scarier than it was when I came out back in sort of the early 2000s. Sort of 2005, 6, 7, that sort of time. And you'd think that things would have got better by now, but they haven't. They did, and then obviously there's been, I think, a backlash to the increased visibility that trans people have had. In the UK here, we are seeing a constant rise in the sort of fascist rhetoric coming out of the government. We've got a very hostile government to not only to trans issues, but that is a big one, to trans rights. We've seen obviously the uptick on social media platforms and in journalistic writing, that kind of thing, from gender critical people, from certainly anti-trans movements. We've got a movement in this country to roll back trans rights. We are seeing the danger of the sort of the rhetoric and the hate speech that we see online and coming from people in power is to, that translates, it does translate into violence, real world violence against trans people. In the US, I know that, the US is facing, I think we're into the hundreds now of bills that are on the books, anti-trans bills, across the states, which is just crazy. And again, an uptick in violence. And all around the world, we see countries where, as scary as things are here and in the US, there are countries where, it's that there aren't any rights, there's no access to healthcare, that it is an even much more dire situation. And it is important to acknowledge that. But for the case of, this video for me, I want to focus on the celebration because I think we need some of that. I think we need to continue to celebrate trans folk everywhere. So, why is this important to me, other than what I've just said? This is visibility. Is the idea of visibility and being visible is important to me, mainly because I've had such a difficult relationship with it. I think in the past, personally, I am transmasculine, genderqueer, I guess is my labels, and I have the ability to be invisible, which is a form of privilege. That I acknowledge that, and sometimes I want to be invisible. I don't want to be outwardly different, but at the same time, and the more and more I get older and more comfortable in myself, the more it feels like a negative, that invisibility, because visibility equals power, it equals agency, and it's important. And that's a kind of a dichotomy that I still not struggle with, but still kind of think about quite a lot. You know, the invisible versus visible kind of question. We all want to be seen. We all want to be heard. And, you know, I think it's finding that balance between kind of the public and the private. But I think visibility is important, A, for your own agency and your own kind of being able to live authentically. But also, you know, I think it's so important, or it's been so important to me in terms of other people's visibility. When I was, you know, way back in the early 2000s, when I was, you know, kind of dealing with and figuring out my gender and the fact that I was different, what helped me get through that was the visibility of other trans folk. And in fact, I did an art exhibition back in 2017. I co-curated an exhibition at the People's History Museum in Manchester, here in the UK, which was a group exhibition of all trans and non-binary artists. And one of the pieces that I did for that is a piece called Me Equals We. And I will put some pictures of the art exhibition up, like the bigger. These were originally big lino cuts, but I redid some of them as digital postcards. And this piece in particular speaks to the people, not just you know, people in the public eye, but also friends, family, etc. But largely, you know, writers, thinkers, artists, etc. Who, because of their visibility and their support, their, you know, kind of outspokenness in support of me and trans stuff in general, trans issues in general, and other kind of sort of elements of the human condition, I guess, philosophers, you know, in there. These were the people that helped me be me, helped me figure out who I was. And so I want to use this and some of the names in this, of some of the trans authors in this, to talk a little bit about some of the books that were instrumental to me, some of the books and some of the writers, the visible writers, who were instrumental in me being able to become who I was always meant to be. So yes, I will link to this and the other artworks on my website. There is another one, another couple about visibility. They're all about visibility. But yes, I'm going to pull some names from that self-portrait and talk about some of the books that I love so much by trans and non-binary authors. I think the first book that I found that really gave me a glimpse into female to male transgender identities, and that was Loren Cameron's Body Alchemy, which is a series of photographic portraits of trans men, along with writings about transition. I don't have a copy of this, unfortunately. I think I only had a copy out of the library at university, and I think I just had it out constantly on kind of, you know, kept renewing the loan. But it's got some incredibly, like, defiant and striking portraits in it. I think it was the visual representations within this that were just so impactful for me. This kind of really sort of, I looked at it and saw elements of myself in it, and that was the first time I'd ever done that. And although it wasn't completely relatable for me, because this is very much kind of a female to male trans man sort of narrative, and that's not my identity. But it was still, in terms of the physical forms, you know, that were represented, I saw them and I just kind of went, yes, that's so close to where I want to go. And so that was the kind of the one of the kind of the nexus points of me kind of starting to explore other representations of trans bodies. And then on from that, I was also looking. I was a gender studies master's student at the time, and I was looking at kind of performance, because my degree had been in drama, in theatre, and I was looking at performance and gender, and had come across the Drag King book by LaGrace, Volcano and J. Jack Halberstam, and that was fascinating just from the performance side of things, but also again the variety of identities that were represented within the pictures and the kind of the accounts from the drag kings themselves and the reasons why they did drag. And I started performing in drag from that, and again that was kind of the beginning of my explorations into gender bending, if you like. But then it became something else for me. It stopped being a performance and became something else, and it was kind of how I really knew that yes, I was going to have to take this further and actually transition. When removing the beard after a performance became a problem, it's something that upset me, and kind of the realization that actually I didn't want to remove it. I wanted that all the time. I wanted to be perceived in that way the entire time. That was a real kind of light bulb moment, if you like. But I was finding it very difficult to sort of situate myself in a kind of sort of trans identities of the time. Because bearing in mind that back in sort of 2005-06, when I was experimenting with all this stuff, there wasn't, the term non-binary and genderqueer wasn't out. Well, it wasn't really out there much. It wasn't really evident, and I knew that I wasn't a trans man. And so that was quite a struggle for me, because I thought at that point, that I couldn't necessarily transition, that wasn't necessarily an option for me, because I didn't want to go all the way that way. But I certainly didn't want to stay as I was. And that became kind of quite a difficult thing to deal with, until I found some more of LaGrace Volcano's work. And this one is one of my favourite books of all time. It's a biggie, and it's Sublime Mutations. And I can't show you much from this because there's a lot of nudity, a hell of a lot of nudity. This is kind of 10 years worth of LaGrace Volcano's work, so from 1990 to 2000. And looks at so many different sort of things around kind of gender and performance, and in terms of performing gender and representing gender. And it has, portraits in it, and has some drag king stuff in it as well. It has trans portraits in it. It has quite a lot of very sexualized or sexual kind of content in it as well, hence why I can't really show you much from it. But mainly it's the first book that kind of really showed me trans bodies that were more ambiguous, and trans identities that were not fitting in the binary. And it was hugely important to me, this one. The visibility of the people in here and the identities in here were instrumental in me realising that there was a path for me, that I wasn't stuck in no man's land and destined, to kind of live a half life, which is how I kind of felt at the time. This kind of really made me kind of go, no, there is a way. And this is, again, it's another really defiant, quite radical for the time, But, you know, most of the stuff I'll talk about is probably a little dated now because we are going back, you know, 20 years plus. But at the time, you know, it was massively important to me. And because I read this and the Drag King book and ended up, you know, wanting to write, I wrote my thesis, my master's thesis, on LaGrace Volcano's work. I ended up going to a conference, it's like a symposium down in London, where I met Del, and then again met them later on at another conference, and actually ended up being able to have a proper like sit down meal, like quite a casual just sit down meal with them, and that was amazing, just to be able to chat to Del and chat about identity and Del's, you know, quite a bit older than me, probably at least 20 something years older, and you know has had a very, very interesting life and been surrounded by, you know, very interesting people, and yeah, that was you know hugely important to me to be able to have those actual conversations with someone. And you know, again, another person who, you know, again, another instance of someone whose visibility and openness really helped me have that confidence to go forwards. And you know, through meeting Del, I met other trans performance artists and trans academics, and ended up with this kind of little kind of group of folks that I could chat to and, you know, call on and stuff like that. And you know, it only takes, you know, sort of one person. You start to see this web of this community that kind of just takes you in and makes sure that you're all right, and just, you know, reassures you that this is, you know, you can do what you need to do. Moving on then, those are probably the two of the most important books for me. But another one that is incredibly important, and another author that is incredibly important to me as well, is Kate Bornstein, who's written various stuff, you know, including, you know, sort of plays and things like that, and has done performance art, and, you know, generally really creative person. The first book that I had from Kate Bornstein was one that a pal of mine gave to me, one of the pals that I'd met through Del, which is My Gender Workbook. You know, this was given to me like right at the beginning of my transition, and you know, it's a wonderfully witty but informative and just interesting book about gender, and about looking at gender and talking about gender and learning about gender. This was a really good one for me in terms of looking at something that is outside the binary. You know, Kate Bornstein, you know, talks extensively about that. Yeah, this one's it's a really good way for someone questioning, I think, their gender, to kind of start to look at understanding how we talk about gender, how we experience gender. But it's funny, you know, it covers so much different stuff. It's got, you know, little work, it is a workbook, it's got little, you know, kind of tests in it, things like that, little puzzles, you know, the gender aptitude test, things like that. But there is, you know, a huge amount of stuff in it, from, you know, kind of just understanding the basics of gender and how we talk about gender, gender and desire, sex and desire, which is really important as well, in terms of how you understand your gender and sexuality and all that mixed in. You know, how we how we look at gender from perspective of, you know, science, law, art, pornography, economy, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, this was just a really useful book. As I say, this was a gift from a buddy of mine, and it has a little inscription in it actually, which I haven't read this for years, but yeah, when I picked this up to kind of research for this video, found the little inscription, and I did roll a little tear because it did take me back to those days, and remind me of kind of quite how important this was. The other Kate Bornstein that I absolutely love is Gender Outlaw, which again there is an updated kind of version of it, I think from 2018, and yeah, Gender Outlaw on Men, Women and the Rest of Us. Again, another extremely witty, extremely funny and inspiring text. Coming out again at a time when non-binary wasn't a term that was used, and that Bornstein's voice is extremely important to me when I was questioning my gender. I got a couple of quotes that I particularly like from Gender Outlaw. One right towards the beginning of the book. I know I'm not a man, about that much I'm clear, and I've come to the conclusion that I'm probably not a woman either, at least not according to a lot of people's rules on that sort of thing. The trouble is, we're living in a world that insists we be one or the other, a world that doesn't bother to tell us exactly what one or the other is. And then again towards the end of the book, and I'm looking forward to the day when people look at this book and say to themselves, how curious to have put all that energy into talking about gender. I wonder what the world must have been like in those days for folks with only two choices. I think those two quotes, sum up for me why it was such an important book. Certainly the first quote was very much, kind of that hit home to me, is not feeling like a man or a woman. More towards one than the other, but certainly not either. But yeah, Bornstein is just such an accessible writer and very acerbic, as I say, very witty, very straightforward, and an absolute legend, and a kind of a hero, I think, to me, in terms of how she talks about being outside of that binary. And as I say, to me, at that time when non-binary and genderqueer wasn't a thing, that was really important. Next up, we've got another legend, of course, Leslie Feinberg. I have talked about transgender warriors before on the channel when I did my LGBT plus History Month special, which is so if you want to know more about that, I'd say head over to that video. I will link to that in the description. But it's basically it is a jaunt through the history of gender expression. It's kind of a personal journey. It's a bit of a memoir as well, and also history and gender theory. Feinberg discusses the fact that there have always been people who cross the cultural boundaries of gender, and they look at a huge variety of examples. Excellent book, thoroughly recommend it, still stands up today. And the other one from Feinberg that I really value is Stone Butch Blues, which is fiction, and follows a character of Jess Goldberg, who is kind of questioning their gender, and it's kind of about it's a hard read, it's a tough read, it's about that questioning and that trying to find their place in the world and their identity, but it's also about the people around them and the discrimination that people faced and still face. I think it's still very relevant today, but it is, as I say, it is a tough read. It does include representations and discussions about anti-Semitism, homophobia, transphobia. There is violence in it, rape. So it is a difficult one, but it's absolutely worth it. It's accessible, like most of Feinberg's stuff, But yeah, that one was kind of it was a gut punch when I read it, but it was incredibly important. So I think those are the ones that I consider being like the most important kind of writers, artists, books that I found sort of at the beginning, towards the beginning of my gendered journey. But I just want to whiz through some of the others that also had an impact on me and featured in my artwork. So I will speed up a little bit on this one now. So first up, we've got Patrick Califia, who has written under the name of Pat Califia as well. And Patrick transitioned in the 90s, I think, and has written both non-fiction, books like Speaking Sex to Power, The Politics of Queer Sex, which is kind of a personal take on BDSM communities, transitioning, queer history of the US, and fiction as well. I mostly know their work through fiction, which is erotic fiction. It's kind of no holds barred stuff. There's a lot of kink, and it was very eye-opening to me in terms of sexuality in relation to gender expression. And I think that's why that's why it was another one that was important to me. Is you can't separate sexuality and desire, I think, from gender, or I can't. And so to read stuff around both was important. Another book which I read when I was doing my gender studies masters was the Transgender Studies Reader, which is edited by Susan Stryker, who is an academic and gender theorist, and Stephen Whittle, who is a trans man who is a lawyer and one of the founders of Press for Change, which is one of the UK's sort of premier trans advocacy organisations. An incredible organisation who I'll come back to very shortly. But yeah, the Transgender Studies Reader covers so many important writers in a collection of essays, academic essays, really, and it brings together voices and experience of trans individuals, doctors, psychologists, academics, to look at the kind of the history of the trans experience. Next up is Christine Burns, who is the other founder of Press for Change, and a writer, an activist, incredible activist. And Christine has written a couple of books. One is a book on the history of Press for Change, and a kind of a memoir of her work, her involvement in activism. Looking at the kind of the campaign for gender recognition in the UK in the late 90s, early 2000s, because Press for Change was instrumental in getting that law through, getting the Gender Recognition Act through Parliament. Pressing Matters, which is that memoir on Christine's work and Press for Change's work. Pressing Matters, there's 2 volumes of it. It is available on Kindle Unlimited if you have access to that. And I do thoroughly recommend it. It's very accessible and very interesting if you're interested in the sort of the that period of history, trans history in the UK. She's also recently edited a collection of essays called Trans Britain, which again I've talked about very briefly, which I haven't read yet, which I talked about briefly in my LGBT plus History Month special. So again, I will link to that. Next up is, I think, a modern classic, which is Redefining Realness by Janet Mock. And this came out in, I think, 2014, and was kind of one of the works, one of the pieces that was kind of part of the transgender tipping point when trans people and trans issues, rights, etc., became much more visible, and there was that was the beginning of this kind of huge uptick in discussion and visibility. It's it's a memoir. Janet Mock relays her experiences of growing up multiracial, poor, trans in America. It's very accessible. It includes really important insight about the challenges and vulnerabilities of a marginalised population, i.e., trans people of colour, trans women of colour, and it's powerful. It's a really powerful vision of sort of possibility and acceptance of ourselves and our own identities, but also of each other. And it's very real. It's unapologetic, and it's a very inspiring piece. Another inspiring memoir for me was Jameson Green's Becoming a Visible Man. Jameson Green was a leading activist in the trans movement way back when I was coming out and kind of figuring out stuff. And this is a both kind of an autobiography and an inquiry into gender, the politics of gender. It's kind of an insight into the challenges of the FTM experience, and looks at encounters of prejudice, sort of relationships, and how relationships can be strained, especially with things like family, to kind of the development of an FTM community, and also looks at gender affirming surgery as well. It's very frank and straightforward. It's poignant. It's a lot of recollections of Green's own experiences, and it really kind of looks at being trans as a human thing, as a human condition. And it also it's quite it's very relatable. I think it's got it speaks to kind of universal things that concern everybody. In particular, the need to live your life authentically, I think. And the final one is Paris Lees, whose memoir, What It Feels Like for a Girl, I haven't read yet, but Paris Lees I came across as a writer in terms of journalistically. Paris Lees was and is still a very a strong voice, and I came across her writing in articles in various news publications, and they've always been extremely important to me. She's written for Gay Times, The Independent, The Guardian, Pink News, I think the Daily Telegraph, lots of different organisations. She was the first trans woman to present on BBC Radio 1 and on Channel 4 TV. She's also an activist. She's worked with Trans Media Watch, and also with All About Trans, which is a project that tries to bring together journalists and other media professionals with transgender people to kind of improve the representation of trans people and trans issues in the media. So those are the people who have been hugely important to me in terms of their visibility. And so I will list all of the books and stuff in the description. So if there's anything you want to go and look up, then you can find all the titles and stuff like that, and the authors in the description. So, looking ahead, I've looked back at what the visibility that was important to me. But looking ahead, these are some of the trans books and trans authors whose work that I am interested to read now. I went for a long time after I kind of got over the initial part of my transition, not wanting to really read anything by trans authors or watch films or TV programs or anything like that with trans issues in them. I think I needed to take a step back and just stop thinking about it for a bit. And also, it was just too hard often to deal with. It was too close to home. But now I'm kind of properly got back into reading, and I've probably got into BookTube, and I'm visible, again. I've decided to be visible again on BookTube as a trans person. I want to like make up for lost time basically, and read all the stuff. I do have a lot of different things that I want to get through, some of which I will be getting through for the fabulous Trans Girl April event, which is starting tomorrow on April the 1st. I have got 9 or 10 books on my TBR for that. The TBR for that will come out on Sunday, this coming Sunday. So if you want to know more about those, I won't mention those here. If you want to know more about those, check out my TBR on Sunday. But these are some of the others that I couldn't fit into Trans Girl April, but I do definitely want to read. So first up, we've got Gender Euphoria, which is edited by Laura Kate Dale, who is a video games journalist. This is not about video games. This is this is a collection of sort of autobiographical stories, mini memoir, if you like. It's an anthology, and it's sharing stories of gender euphoria. So that powerful feeling of happiness that is experienced, as a result of moving away from your birth assigned gender. And this covers stories from trans women, trans men, non-binary folk, gender fluid, agender, intersex. So it's a real kind of fantastic mix of people. It's so often, I think, the stories that I've read, and this is the reason why I moved away from reading and consuming stories about other trans experiences, was that back then, that so often it was about the difficulties of transition and gender dysphoria and that kind of deep discomfort. And I didn't want to read that. I was feeling it, and I didn't want to. It's too close to home, as I say. Whereas this is what I want now. This is what I want to read. These stories of hope. And euphoria and happiness. So that one is definitely on my list, and probably I will come to that later in the year when I've got a plan for some joyous queer reading. Next up, we've got another memoir by a trans man called Amateur: A True Story About What Makes a Man by Thomas Page McBee. Which is a memoir as well as an exploration of masculinity in general, and I think it's kind of told as Thomas trains for and does some amateur boxing, I believe, and so I think that one could be really interesting. And that was another thing when I was kind of exploring gender and stuff back in the early 2000s, there wasn't a huge amount by trans men, and so I'm kind of interested to catch up with sort of some more trans-masculine narratives and trans-masculine stories. Next up, we've got Rika Aoki. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. There are several books, but the one that keeps popping up that I see mentioned time and time again is Light from Uncommon Stars, which is described as an adventure set in California's San Gabriel Valley with cursed violins, Faustian bargains, and queer alien courtship over fresh-made donuts. It sounds fascinating. It sounds really imaginative, sci-fi fantasy, and from what I see, it gets fantastic reviews. I know a lot of people love it, so that one is on my list as well. One that I've had on my list for a while, but haven't kind of haven't had the headspace to kind of read yet, is The Transgender Issue, An Argument for Justice by Sean Fay, which I think came out either last year or the year before. In this, Sean Fay reclaims the idea of the transgender issue to look at the reality of what it is to be trans in a transphobic society. It's, you know, I think it's focused sort of quite widely on Britain, but does go beyond that. Yeah, it sounds very compelling, but it sounds like something that I might find more difficult to read in terms of the sort of stuff that Sean Fay is talking about. But it is one that I definitely want to get to. And so that one will be a mood read for me at some point when I just kind of go, yeah, no, I'm ready for that. Read it now. Then we're into a couple of fictions. We've got, I think, probably not similar in terms of the way they're written and their content, but certainly similar in terms of their hard-hitting nature. First one is Alison Rumfitt's Tell Me I'm Worthless, which is described as a dark, unflinching, haunted house novel that takes readers from the well of the literary Gothic up through Brighton's queer scene and out into the heart of modern-day trans experience in the UK. I think this one from what I've heard, deals with fascism and the trans experience, and I think it's meant to be, you know, it's horror, and I think it's meant to be quite hard to read, and it sounds, you know, to me it sounds hard, like a hard one to read. And in the same mold, there's also, I suppose, like the American version, I guess you'd say, which is Manhunt by Gretchen Falker-Martin, which is a post-apocalyptic novel that follows trans women and men on a journey of survival, basically in a world where I think if you have too much testosterone, you turn into these kind of like rabid zombie kind of creatures, and it's in a situation, you know, in a society where there are kind of, you know, murderous TERFs as well. It, by all accounts, again, it's an incredibly difficult read, and very angry, and I do really want to read it. But again, both this and the Alison Rumfitt Tell Me I'm Worthless, I'm a little scared to read, I have to be honest, just in terms of how they might affect me. So again, I think I'm going to save those for a project I've got later in the year, where I read all the things that I've up till now been too scared to read. So I think those two will come round in October, I should think. And then the final one is a mention of something that I was incredibly pleased to hear about the other day, and that is a play. Anybody who follows the channel will know that I am super into my plays, coming from a drama background. And this one is called In the Amazon Parking Lot, and it is by a playwright called Sarah Mantell. And it has just won the Susan Smith Blackburn Prize for Playwriting. And when Mantell wrote the play, they said, quote, "My wildest dream was that it would become something my generation of actors could age towards. There are so few roles for women, trans and non-binary actors in the second half of their careers, when many of them are just hitting the peak of their ability." It's written for a cast of 7 female, non-binary and transgender actors, all aged over 50, and it explores queer aging, capitalism, falling in love, in an apocalypse. It sounds wonderful. I've been aware of Sarah Mantell for a little while, but I haven't had a chance to read any of their work yet. I can't seem to find any play scripts over here. But I'm going to keep searching, and I'm just really happy that play won the prize, because hopefully that will, you know, raise their visibility in their profile, and the profile of you know, the actors that are, you know, that are able to perform in this, and just the general kind of, you know, the idea of, you know, trans and non-binary theatre. So yes, so those are all of the texts and authors that I am really looking forward to reading soon, apart from the ones, as I say, that are in my Transgirl April reading list. So do check that out as well. I've got stuff in there from Juliet Jacks and Munro Bergdorf, who I love, and Rhea Ewing, and Nat Reeve, and oh goodness, there's loads and loads. Alex Bertie. So yes, do check that out on Sunday when that comes out if you're interested in more. So last thing to do is to look at some of the trans and non-binary YouTubers that I really appreciate. Since coming to BookTube, I found a lot more trans content, you know, trans content creation, and also, you know, reviews about trans books. And, you know, I ummed and ahed about coming out and, you know, being visibly trans as a BookTuber, because, as I say, visibility isn't something that I find easy. But it's, you know, it's important to me. I think at this point it's important to me. I feel like I want to kind of be able to stand my ground and just be authentic and talk about this sort of stuff. You know, it's like I couldn't do this video without being out. So, you know, it feels the right time for me now. But my confidence in doing that has been hugely uplifted by watching some of the other trans booktubers that are out there, and other trans YouTubers as well. And so I just want to shout out a few of those folks that I really appreciate and whose channels that I really love. So first up, we've got Sis Kevy. Kevy is fantastic, hilarious, really great at the succinct kind of reviews, but reads so much different stuff, some great trans books recommendations, and is the founder of Transgirl April, which I am so looking forward to, and is just the perfect event for me. So do go and check out Kevy's channel. I will link to all of these channels in the description. But yes, do check Kevy's channel out if you don't already watch. Fantastic stuff. Next up is Willow over at Books and Bow. Willow is also, I think, a co-host of Transgirl April, and yeah, Willow's content is also absolutely fantastic. Some incredible book reviews, some just really insightful, really intelligent, again funny, really passionate about what they're reading, and it's, yeah, I've just found, you know, with both Kevy and Willow's channels, two of my favourite channels, and just very open and warm and authentic people. Another one that I've watched for a while is Jessie on YouTube. Jessie's channel was formerly Bow Ties and Books, I believe. And Jessie is non-binary booktuber of colour, and does a lot of content on writers of colour, and non-binary writers, and again, just, you know, really authentic, you know, straightforward stuff, very impassioned, and somebody who's straightforward kind of opinions I really appreciate. And another one who I haven't seen a video from for a while, so I'm not sure if he's still making them, but that is Leo Bancroft. And Leo did a fantastic tag a while ago, I think probably a year ago now, something like that. I think around the time of last year's Trans Day of Visibility, which was, Stand with Trans Kids tag, and was, to kind of to raise money for some of the organisations in the US supporting trans kids. And again, Leo's just a very upbeat, very positive presence, and has a great variety of book talk. So yeah, I'm not sure if Leo's still posting stuff. The channel his channel is still there, so check it out. But yeah, I've not seen a video pop up from Leo for a little while, but I do want to mention him because again, he's another one that I've enjoyed immensely. And then just to mention a few that they're not booktubers, they're maybe booktube adjacent in some respects, or they're just YouTubers that I appreciate. First one is Laura Kate Dale. As I say, Laura Kate Dale is a video games journalist, and her channel is video games related. A lot of stuff about accessibility in video games, and that's really interesting stuff. But just really interesting takes on video game development and content, that kind of thing. Another one on the video game side of things is Jessie Gender, who has a presence on several channels, in fact. There's Jessie Gender, and there's Jessie Gender After Dark, which is the channel I actually really like. It's a bit more casual. Jessie Gender, that channel is pop culture, video games, but also a lot about trans rights. Really good stuff about trans rights. Jessie's, again, extremely articulate and informed, intelligent, very open, and I really appreciate her content. But I came across Jessie's stuff through GameSpot, and some of the video essays that she's done on there, and they are fantastic. And she's very, very funny as well. I really appreciate the sense of humour. So do check Jessie's channels out. One that I can't not mention is Juno Birch. Juno is a drag performer, an alien queen. I will link to her YouTube channel. I know Juno through the art exhibition that I put on. She was one of the artists that we had exhibiting with us, and her drawings are absolutely fantastic. But she's gone on since that to kind of go more into the world of performance, and she's just taken off. She's doing amazingly well, and rightly so, because she's brilliant, and she's hilarious. And her YouTube channel is various things from drag con and that kind of stuff, but also kind of makeup and how she puts on all of her makeup and costume and wigs and all that kind of stuff, and also just her playing The Sims, things like that. So there is kind of a good variety on there, and she is hilarious. And the final one is Abigail Thorne, with the channel being Philosophy Tube. And Abigail transitioned while doing Philosophy Tube, and it is what it says, philosophy largely. And again, another person who's incredibly well informed, intelligent, funny, great presentation style, and yeah, again, I really appreciate those videos. So I think I've come to the end of what I can fit in, basically. So yes, I will leave it there for today. It only remains to say huge love and solidarity to all my trans sisters and brothers and my non-binary and genderqueer siblings. You all give me hope and strength and joy, and I appreciate you all. To those folks who might not want to be visible or might not feel able to be visible, please do know that I know you exist and that you are loved. And finally, a word to those who aren't trans but are our supporters and allies. Thank you. We need our allies so badly right now. So please continue to stand up against transphobia where you see it and call it out. It really is appreciated and it really is needed. It's so easy at the moment to get bogged down in all the nastiness that we see. And it's important to remember that together we are such a strong community and that we have lots of support from a huge variety of people. So we need to keep the faith. I think we've got to keep the faith. So huge love to everybody and happy Trans Day of Visibility. Ta-ra from me.